Okay, guys, I'm going to hit the button. So in about 30 seconds, we'll be live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Pollstar live digital session. My name is Eric Renner Brown. I'm editor and reporter at Pollstar and sister publication VenuesNow. We're very excited to be coming to you live today, 5 days out, if you can believe it, from the presidential election that many have called the most consequential in a generation, if not ever. Millions of Americans have already cast their votes, and if the trends hold, turnout could be unprecedented. Among all this, the live industry has played a pivotal role. Artists have used their platforms to encourage voting and speak out about the issues that are important to them. Physical touring largely offline, many have performed digital concerts to get out and vote, and venues across the country have opened their gate to voters eager to cast ballots. Today, I am joined by some of the leading minds behind Live's tremendous civic engagement effort. First off, we've got Emily White, who co-founded iVoted, which will host hundreds of artists for a 14-hour Election Day streaming festival on Tuesday. You can read all about it in Pollstar's current issue. Among the artists participating in iVoted are Drive-By Truckers and Living Color. Members of each band, Patterson Hood and Vernon Reed, have stopped by to give us some artist perspective today. Continuing on, we've got Andy Bernstein, who founded voter engagement organization Headcount a decade and a half ago, which just registered its millionth voter, I believe, and has a stage at iVoted Festival. We also have iVoted board member and Warped Tour founder Kevin Lyman. And last but not least, we have 49ers Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel Hannah Gordon, who has been integral in opening Levi's Stadium for voting during this election cycle. Sadly, two additional panelists couldn't make it. Mary Kay, who's the co-founder of the platform Mandolin, which will host iVoted Festival, was feeling under the weather today. And due to Hurricane Zeta, Steve Koonin, the general manager of Atlanta's State Farm Arena, couldn't get online. So we're wishing them both the best. Before we go any further, I want to direct anybody who's watching this to please submit questions via our Facebook comments. We'll screen them and hopefully, ask some questions of our lovely panelists here. So just to get right into it, I want to kind of go through everybody on the panel and talk a little bit about what you've got cooking in your own respective, corners of the industry. So start off with Emily. Can you tell us a little bit about background on iVoted? You started in 2018. Obviously, there's a little bit of a different world back then. Kind of how things shaken out this year, and tell us about this really cool hundreds of artists involved in iVoted Festival.
Yeah, definitely. So as you know, I'm originally from Wisconsin, where the 2016 presidential election was decided by 22,000 votes and change. It was decided next door in Michigan by 10,000 votes and change. And I'd read that voter turnout was down in Milwaukee, where I'm from. And so my brain was kind of like, 22,000, that's our basketball arena in Milwaukee. Why don't we put together some sort of sick concert and tie in voting? And I realized if we took the concept national, we could have that much more impact. So as you know, that's what we did for the 2018 midterm elections. We activated over 150 venues in 37 states to let fans in on election night who show a selfie from outside their polling place. Now we've obviously pivoted under the pandemic, and we've been inviting artists to perform via webcast on election night. Fans can access the stream with a selfie at home with their blank and unmarked mail-in ballot, or from outside their polling place, or next to their post office if they've mailed already, or next to their mailbox. And fans access the stream by RSVPing with that RSVPing with that selfie, and also international fans and underage fans can RSVP as well. Now, instead of just getting, even though I have met Vernon before, and Patterson probably doesn't even remember, but I advanced some shows for you back in the day at Madison House. Instead of just getting these artists that we know and that we love, we reached out to artists who are the top streaming acts in and or from each state. starting with swing states. And Living Colors, a top streaming artist in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Drive By Truckers in Georgia, which is a swing state this year. So yeah, out of that, like 500 artists have confirmed, which sadly makes it the largest music festival of the year, and is also going to smash the record for the largest single night digital concert in history, all in support of voter turnout. So it really started with that venue number, though. That was kind of where the kernel began.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really amazing. And, turning to Patterson and Vernon, I wanted to know if you guys could speak to your involvement with this. What has it been like, getting involved as artists with this really cool platform? I mean, maybe start with Vernon.
It had a standing offer from the Ardmore Music Hall to do a gig. And I was kind of very reticent to, leave my house. And, it was going to be a thing where the band would play together. We hadn't seen each other since about March. I mean, we hadn't been physically together. And so we had the standing offer, and I was really reticent. And then I thought about the upcoming election and thought about Pennsylvania as a battleground state. And, previously we played at the Brooklyn Bowl, during the midterms. And, like New York is already kind of, I'll just set aside partisanship. But it was very important for us to participate in getting the vote out. And it felt like doing the gig in Pennsylvania was going to be more impactful even than doing it in New York. And basically brought it with the guys, and everybody was down with it. And then we just, drove our set. And the hall was great. We had a great time with the staff, and it all went very smooth.
Mm-hmm. In Patterson, can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved? I know that Drive By was involved in the 2018 iteration of I Voted.
Right. We're always trying to do whatever we can. I mean, it's things have to change. It was, of course, extra challenging right now because we're, with everything shut down, and I live on the other side of the country from the rest of my bandmates. So that has caused a lot of extra challenges and kept us from being able to do something as a group and the way to the extent that we would like to. But yeah, it's we're just trying to do anything we can to so that we can know that we've done all we can do.
Yeah, of course, and it's really cool seeing for both of your bands getting involved in swing states where it really does feel like voter turnout and getting people to the polls is going to be the difference maker in this election.
Just to highlight that, both played I Voted 2018. So Vernon had Living Color had a sold out show at Brooklyn Bowl. And then Drive By Truckers were doing, I believe, a 3-night residency at Saturn,
Birmingham,
in Alabama, right? So
that's right.
We're so psyched to have them both return in the virtual.
Amazing. Yeah, and they're just an interesting side note, and we'll get into a little bit more into I Voted's lineup, but just two of many returning artists, which has been very cool to see that you brought so many people back in addition to all the cool new people you added. I wanted to turn to Andy. You're obviously a very influential figure in terms of the intersection of voting and music. Leading head count for the last, is it 15 or 16 years? I want to make sure I have my facts straight.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about obviously this has been a different election season than you've ever seen because of kind of the crises facing our country with the pandemic and the George Floyd protests and stuff. Can you tell me about engaging with voters and music this time around?
Sure. Well, kind of like Emily's path with I Voted, we had to pivot to all digital, and it was certainly a real jolt. I mean, when the pandemic hit, we were out on tour with Billie Eilish and Sturgill Simpson, and we had probably 50 tours lined up for the year. And we're kind of, really growing. We'd expanded our staff and, had a vision for a year that was like, dozens of festivals, all these things. And then it just stopped overnight. And the first couple months were really quiet. We registered 1,000 voters on our website in the month of April, our goal for the cycle was 200,000. So it was like, wow. But we started kind of figuring out new methods, and we started going to artists saying, hey, would you do a Zoom call with fans who vote? And like let's make a contest where people can enter the contest by checking their registration status. So we started rolling those out. And then when the George Floyd murder happened and the protest started, it was like the lights came on. Suddenly artists were coming to us, and our website was just getting hit, where we were, instead of registering 1,000 people a month, we were registering close to that a day. And it kind of continued through the summer. We just started doing everything. We partnered with Spotify and American Eagle and SoundCloud and the Grammys and AEG and Live Nation. And by the time September hit, it just all gelled, and we ended up registering 425,000 people for this cycle, which was by far the most we'd ever done. We had over 500,000 people come to our website and check their registration status, which means they're also opting in for more information from us and get out the vote information. And now as we come to almost the eve of the election, honestly, we are scared, because what happened last night is that Associate Justice Samuel Alito signaled the intent to essentially potentially override the will of the people in Pennsylvania. What he said was that they will go back and they will potentially nullify votes, mail-in ballots that are postmarked on or before Election Day, but arrive after, despite the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying that's okay. So we are really, really scared right now. And our hope is that whatever the outcome is, it's not close, so that our democracy itself isn't in crisis. But Pennsylvania will probably decide the outcome of the election, or whoever wins Pennsylvania will probably be president. And now we have a situation where that we're basically told what's going to happen if it's close. So our big focus in the next few days is to get particularly Pennsylvania-based musicians to get word out. Word is simple: don't put your ballot in the mail. Do not put your ballot in the mail. It probably won't count if it matters. Go and drop it off at a drop box. So we're in kind of an emergency war room situation right now, but we're really looking forward to Election Day. Not only are we doing I Voted Festival, but we're also going to have Instagram Live throughout the day with a lot of the artists who've been most supportive, including some who are playing the I Voted Festival: Jim James, Amanda Palmer. So we're going to check in during the day, have a kind of fun day, just rallying last people to vote. And then what we hope is that I Voted is a real celebration. We have on our stage, we're going to have musicians actually jamming live to the returns as they come in, starting at 9 o'clock, creating a soundtrack to history, following a really incredible lineup. So it's been great to work with Emily and her terrific team of all volunteers who've worked really, really hard. And we're really proud to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very interesting point that I want to, flag for anybody watching. We'll get back to the panel in a sec, but definitely take your ballots if you're able. Take them to the polling place to drop them off. I'm in New York, and that's what I'm doing, despite having gotten an absentee ballot earlier in the process. That is the most reliable way, it sounds like, at this point. Turning to you, Kevin, I wanted to, you're on I Voted's board. I want to know if you could speak to getting involved and why this was such an important initiative to you. And, you have this deep history dating back to Warped Tour and stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about, getting involved with this initiative and how it maybe compares to things you've seen previously in your career?
I realize I've kind of been involved in music and voting for almost 30 years. When I was running all the shows for Golden Voice, we used to do the first Rock the Vote benefit concerts out here in Los Angeles. I wish I could find that poster somewhere in storage, but it was one of the original signed posters. But through that time, and especially with what I worked with was always younger people. And I felt that, 10% of the people that came to my festivals wanted a little more than just having a good time. So that's why we had so many different things about civic engagement. That once led to me going to Andy, we need to have a person out on the Warped Tour. They need to be out there registering. And our festival was the highest registering festival when we were out on the road. I met Emily, and we met in New York. And I like to say she rode up on a bicycle in New York, and it was an interesting discussion. And then all of a sudden, she told me what she was doing, and I was able to jump in a little bit and get some of the artists from more of my world that in 2018 involved. We're down to vote. absolutely, this is bipartisan. I'm working though in some of the voter suppression areas. And I'm also a full-time professor at USC. So trying to lead by example, and we have quite a few students now who are volunteers for I Voted. It gave them an opportunity in a time when they don't have as many opportunities for internships. And so I don't know, it's probably about a dozen USC students. I see their names popping up all the time that have come in and helping out. And it is so important. And for me, maybe that's just my background. And right now, it's if I can help out, and I'm trying to jump in, and in the future, we need to pull it together even more. We have our Down to Vote, which is a younger voting. Before you're able to vote, we got their registrations and sent them a birthday card with information on how to register. So, I just like to keep busy too. So I've had a little extra time in the last few months to be able to be in the background and help out wherever I can.
I believe that's interesting that you bring up the Down to Vote thing, because that's actually a commonality with I Voted, that there's a functionality of I Voted. You obviously get free admission if you show a picture with you and your ballot or polling place, whatnot. But you can also, if you are underage, you can share why you're excited to vote, and that's your ticket to the show. So that's
to clarify, if you're under 18. You can submit a video letting us know what election you will be 18 for and why you're excited to vote.
Yes. Very, very cool stuff. Turning to you, Hannah, we had originally had you and Steve on here kind of from the venue sports world. Steve taken out due to hurricane. So I'm going to ask you to kind of talk broadly about the entire sports and venue sphere, with obviously relating to Levi's. Can you speak to organizing the polling place at Levi's and kind of the process that went into that, what inspired it, and what the reception has been like?
Sure. So we've been active in voting for a couple of years now. We've done voter registration drives with the Secretary of State, with our players, with our staff, with the public. And then in the past year, we became a polling place actually for the primary elections. And so we were already planning to be a polling place also for this election. Obviously, the pandemic changed a little bit of some of the logistics in that I think a lot more people will be just dropping off an absentee ballot, because here in California, we have a wonderful Secretary of State who ensured that every person, whether or not you have registered as an absentee, received a mail-in ballot, received them plenty early at the beginning of October. And so we have millions of votes that have already been turned in our state. I would really encourage anyone who's watching who works at a venue to think about for future elections. We've got elections every other year in this country, and it's a great opportunity to bring people to your venue who maybe haven't been there before, to engage the community that lives around your venue. And it's incredibly easy to do. Again, it may be easier when you are in a state that doesn't engage in voter suppression. But if you are in a state that engages in that, or a county that engages in that type of behavior where they have not made it as easy to vote perhaps as other places, that's when it's even more important that you make yourself available. I think in this pandemic, we also have a really special opportunity at venues that are, basketball arenas, football stadiums, music venues, because they're large venues. They're much larger than most polling places are. In a lot of places, a library, a school, even someone's home may be a polling place, and it's harder to do social distancing in those type of situations. And so for us, we have, hundreds of thousands of square feet of space. We can bring in a ton of people and have them be well spaced out. So I think it's a great opportunity that probably venues for, decades were really overlooking, and hopefully now we'll all be engaged in.
Yeah, that was actually one of my things I was really interested in, because there's been a lot of talk about like, oh well, it's easy for these venues to do this when there isn't the rigors of like a normal season going on or whatever. But do you think that this will be something that, now that we've kind of unlocked these venues as polling places, do you think that could well continue into the future, even in a post-COVID world?
Absolutely. I mean, even with early voting, with having our stadium open for several days, for us, as long as it's not on a game day, that's very easy to do. And in football, we only play at home once every 2 weeks, even during football season. And then during the primary season, we didn't have an event on the day that folks were voting, other than private events. Also, you don't need to use your entire venue to do it, is the other thing to keep in mind. So again, unless you're having a full venue event that day during the day before 8 p.m., I think it's something that people can engage in all the time, every other year.
So, kind of open it up to the whole panel. I wanted to know if people could kind of speak about, I guess, the challenges of doing this, just broadly speaking, not even necessarily relating to the pandemic, but kind of the challenges of, resistance you may have met. Obviously, this is a very, there's always been this kind of stigma or, framing of like artists or teams or whatever, taking a stand, speaking out for what they believe in. And everybody here, your efforts are all nonpartisan, which I think is really, admirable and notable. But still, even so, I'm sure that there is some resistance. Does anybody want to speak to resistance they may have met? Hey, Kevin, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. I can speak on one thing. It was very interesting because we have a lot of corporate relationships out there in the world, and we were trying to bring some of these people in because there was a lot of talk about early on, that we need to have voting, we need to elect. But it was very interesting in the last 21 days, and you put yourself in their shoes. But in the last 21 days before this election, when just voting became partisan, those conversations, I've been on enough calls with companies in my life and discussing, and everyone kind of the discussion changed. But we are a bipartisan, and we're celebrating that we all have the right to vote in America. And that was what we were really taking that approach. But you heard those discussions change in the last 21 days, where voting is viewed as partisan in many ways. And I know Emily could probably touch on some of the artists that, when they post it up, people, it's unbelievable and mind-boggling to me that in America, just voting could be looked at as partisan now.
Yeah, not to freak anyone out, but there is one artist that wanted to shout out fans who voted. So they asked for the fans to post RSVPs, and they did have to shut down their Instagram comments because I guess it got a little too intense. But to Kevin's point, to be totally honest, for us, we're not funded. So funding was really challenging. I know Kevin and his fabulous GM, Kate Truscott, been working so hard, but like Kevin said, it's like brands are starting to shy away from the voting space, which is weird and very different. But at the same time, people are more motivated than ever. We have over 225 volunteers making I Voted Festival happen, from legendary executives like Kevin down to his students. So I know we all experience this working on events, but like we've built this incredible family as our executives are starting to get other jobs after this, because we are 100% women at the executive level. And actually, I just found out our overall team is 92% women, people of color, non-binary, or LGBTQ+. But as I see some of our executives start to get hired after this, it feels like my sisters are getting married or something, because I'm so happy for them, but they're moving on to other things. But my point is, man, I've never seen more motivated people just willing to roll up their sleeves. And, if someone goes down sick or something happens to someone personally, someone else steps up. So, we've been making this thing happen hell or high water, even if brands, are freaked out by the voting space right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
On a positive note, I think that a lot of brands, I would not say that brands as a whole are freaked out. There are some who are, but for everyone that is staying away, there are 5 who are coming in. And that's not an exaggeration. The Civic Alliance, which is a kind of group of big corporate, is hundreds of companies that are signed on to support voter engagement. And the Time to Vote initiative is thousands of companies giving employees time off to vote. And on our end, headcount, we had over 15 corporate sponsors this year that were cash paying sponsors. It was probably our number one source of revenue was corporate, well in excess of $1 million. So we are seeing, and this is new. This wasn't happening previous cycles at that scale. So I think there are always going to be brands that stay away and shy away. But we're also seeing that I think brands recognize that this is the biggest event in America. This is bigger than the Super Bowl. And you also have a lot of people, personal interest in the C-suite level and companies that want to do what they can. So I think we've seen a major positive turn of the role of corporate America and brands messaging around voter engagement.
Any brands want to invest in women, we're here.
I think it's so funny that Andy, you said that it's bigger than the Super Bowl, because I think it demonstrates that the Super Bowl is what we measure by, right? The Super Bowl is what brings all of America together and the world. And football is such the American sport. I think that we have an obligation in sports and in music because collectively we are what pushes the culture forward. We are what kids pay attention to. We have a responsibility then to give back to America, to ensure that our democracy maintains itself, right? Like this is a part of who we are. And for us, in terms of brands like Levi's, which is our naming rights partner for Levi's Stadium, obviously they are very involved in the voting movement. And so they've been very supportive and excited about it.
Yeah, I think that sports jumping in here is a major story of 2020. I mean, that had really not happened before, and now it's everywhere. And I think it kind of broke down some of the barriers where my background is actually in sports. I was working in sports when Headcount started. And I always had it in my mind was, well, sports is separate. You know, music is inherently political and sports is separate. And I kind of fell into that trap myself, even though it was my background. And then this year we saw, you know, every sports league get behind it. Every sports league get behind Black Lives Matter. And I think we're never going back. We recognize that, you know, cultural leaders have a place here. Sports are cultural leaders. Athletes are cultural leaders. And I also think it really shows the nonpartisanship too, that sports or leagues are reaching a very different audience, particularly football, than, you know, than a rock band or something. So I think when we look back at 2020, regardless of the election results, this is the year where kind of everybody got in, and I hope they stay in. That's the real hope.
Mm-hmm. Hannah, just kind of going off that, I wanted to know if you could speak to, obviously you're 49ers specific, but could you speak to the extent that you're able about the league-wide NFL votes effort? Because that's been
absolutely
that's been fascinating to me for how it's brought in people from all over the country, all over different electorates, all of that.
Yeah, so I think Annie made a great point that I think what people saw in June was the need to step into the space of social justice, but I think people were also looking for nonpartisan ways to do that. And voting is one of the most obvious ways to do that. And it's also a really key area for impacting social justice. So when we look at criminal justice reform, we look at policing, these are very impacted by local elections, from who you're voting for DA, for local judges. So these are really key areas for people to be involved. And so from that, the NFL Votes campaign happened, which has gotten many venues around the league to participate as polling places, has helped register thousands of players, staff, coaches around the league, as well as the public. And so it's been, and you've probably seen, like, I think in terms of an NFL Sunday, when you're watching broadcasts all day long, that's really valuable commercial time. And you've been seeing NFL Votes every single Sunday for the last several Sundays on that commercial time. So I think, like you said, it's reaching everybody, because at the end of the day, this isn't about getting a particular group of people to vote. It's about getting everyone to vote. Like, we get the democracy we deserve. The democracy that we get is based on who decided to vote. And so no one should be afraid, I think, to the point that people were making earlier. It would break my heart for people to be afraid for certain people to vote. We should want everybody to vote, regardless of what party we support.
Yeah, and I'm sure that everybody, on this panel and watching has seen, the pie charts or whatever that circulated after the 2016 election, where it's like, well, this chunk went to Hillary, this chunk went to Trump, and then this chunk, which is equal to those two combined, just didn't vote, more or less. So, it's so important to get everybody engaged. Patterson and Vernon, I wanted to kind of get the artist perspective. Obviously, both, veterans, you've been at this for a while. Can you tell me, I guess, how you've seen audience perspective shift in terms of, how artists approach activism and speaking out and being politically involved? I think that, that attitude has kind of evolved over time. Maybe Patterson, if you want to start.
Yeah, the bands I've loved since I was a teenager have tended to be political, and I mean, I was a huge Clash fan, and I'm a huge Living Colour fan. I have to throw in too. I saw Living Colour at the Nick in Birmingham, and then a year almost to the day later saw Living Colour at Legion Field in Birmingham opening for the Stones. So I've always been moved by bands that spoke out about things that were going on, and I've always considered our band to be political. And although I think we turned the heat up on that quite a bit in 2016 with our American band record, and the backlash we got initially, you know, particularly on social media, it was like, have you people not been listening? Have we've been saying this stuff all along, you know? But there was a huge backlash. But at the same time, you know, it worked out. I don't care. I mean, it's like, you know, if you're gonna tell me to shut up and sing, I just assume you not be there. I don't, you know, Lord knows I'll take your money if you're throwing it at me, but I'm not in this to for that. We're gonna do what we're gonna do, and we always have. And you know, and I'm just proud that my bandmates feel as strongly about it as I do, and that there's, you know, things like the I voted movement and head count in different places where we can be involved. You know, even now with everybody spread out and, you know, not able to go out and play live music like we love, we can still be involved and engaged.
And for myself, this is really connected to the things that led to me becoming a musician in the first place. You know, in a lot of ways, when I think about voting and talking to people about voting and, you know, participating fully in their citizenship, I'm thinking about all the people who paid with their lives. People paid with their lives. People paid with their lives like soldiers paid with their lives. For us to sit back and, you know, and that responsibility, I take it seriously. I'm thinking about all the people who are not here, who were here in March. People like Wallace Roney, a great jazz trumpeter, you know. I'm thinking about my friend Ronnie Drayton, great guitar player. Most of y'all ain't heard about him. Thinking about just so many people who sacrificed. And also, there's another thing too. Like, we're made to feel small. That's kind of part of the gig, right? Is to make people feel powerless. Like, you don't count, you're not famous, you know, you're not trending. And this is really about everybody who's on the outside trying, you know, who feels like they're on the outside looking in. It's that serious for me. And all the trending and that's all beautiful. That's great. But if we could do something that gets a person to wait online and be an American, that's it for me.
Brendan, I want to add that when I was a freshman in college, I had a professor who used open letter to a landlord as like a lesson plan. And it was a very political class. And it definitely shaped me in terms of just the power of music and message together. And I think somewhere it was in the DNA of Headcount. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, kind of going, you know, obviously this year has been so out of the ordinary and so unusual, and people have had to pivot and adapt their models, and, you know, voting and voter engagement are no different. I wanted to know if people could kind of speak to silver linings to the extent that there has been. I mean, you know, like, I'm a huge Deadhead. I was, you know, Dead and Company as a Headcount artist. I was excited to, you know, see Headcount at the Dead and Co show at MetLife in August. You know, I was going to Lock-In. I was excited to see Headcount at Lock-In. I was pretty sure it was going to have a presence there, but, you know, that stuff was off the table. But now we get, you know, like something like I Voted, you know, hundreds of artists involved in a thing that probably wouldn't have, you know, existed, at least in this format, had the pandemic not happened. So, you know, I wanted to kind of know silver linings to the extent that there are some, in terms of this is a radically different thing than we imagined in January, but it does seem to have created, you know, some new opportunities for engagement.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this has certainly opened us up to a hybrid model for 2022 and beyond post-vaccine. Our hearts are absolutely with venues and, you know, in real life, live music. We can't wait to return to that. But think about it. It's like, you know, Living Color had a sold out Brooklyn Bowl show for us in 2018. Drive By Truckers had multiple sold out shows at Saturn. And now we can also webcast that to people who can't be at those shows, if they, if they don't live there, if they're, caretaking, if they have a disability for whatever reason. So for us, it's just, completely expanded our reach in the future, which I don't know, I'm sure the industry would have caught up to that, but it kind of forced us to. So that's really exciting for us to turn out even more voters in 2022 and beyond.
I wanted to know if anybody could kind of comment about, and I think that we mentioned this earlier in the panel, but kind of expound upon the importance of the youth vote, because everybody here, whether we're talking about football fans or music fans, huge potential to tap into youth audiences, and youth vote has been traditionally weak in recent elections. Can folks kind of chime in about the importance of engaging youth voters with these platforms?
Go ahead, Andy.
I can throw some stats out. You mentioned those pie charts, and what we're referencing is that more people didn't vote than voted for either Trump or Clinton in 2016. The non-voters kind of won or lost the election, however you want to look at it. And when you look at young voters, it's even more serious. Like turnout was a little over 55% for overall, and it was a little over 45% for young voters. In midterm elections, it can be as low as 20%. But here's the good news: is the last midterm election, it was close to 40%. It nearly doubled. After being flat for as long as I've been doing this, it nearly doubled. So we're really hopeful. And then young voters do vote very differently than their parents. And the latest Harvard poll had Biden 2-1 over Trump. And that's just, I'm not saying that it's a partisan thing, it's just a fact. So when young people turn out, the arc of history bends faster. Young people have different values than older people, and those values get reflected in who's elected. And so there's an incredible amount at stake. And when young people vote, it absolutely determines who wins. There's just no question about it. And so if young people turn out big time this election, there'll probably be one result. And if we're writing headlines about young people not turning out and it being a disappointment, that you can guess what that headline is also going to be.
Yeah. Andy, I sort of wanted to ask, do you see any difference when you're kind of, you have these, obviously many artists involved in headcount, ranging from, the Billie Eilishes of the world, who are very, in tune with Gen Z, and up to like the Dead and Co's of the world, who definitely you would think have a older fan base. Does that kind of, how does that impact how you go about, working with these various artists, and like, are there different strategies at all?
Absolutely, and it's a great question, and it's interesting. I mean, the short answer is we're always trying to work with artists that have a young fan base. And some of the challenges, when Headcount started, I was a young voter, and I have a lot less hair and a lot more years on me now, and I don't know what's cool anymore. And it's a personal challenge for me to really kind of, be kind of see things through the eyes of a young voter when that's not me anymore. But you'd be surprised. We register more voters at a Dead and Company show than we do at a Billie Eilish show. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Also that a lot of the Billie Eilish fans are under 18. And we'll register people under 18 in states that allow it, but it's still a challenge. What we found this year, and something we've known for a while, is the people who have the most influence with young voters are YouTube content creators by so many miles. And we worked with a content creator named David Dobrik, and he had a crazy idea to give away 5 Teslas to people who check their registration status. And through that, we had 500,000 people sign up, and 125,000 of them registered to vote. And they were almost all young voters. So, I mean, Ariana Grande, who's our #1 act in terms of impact, I don't think we've even hit 20,000 with her. So the YouTube content creators just have this command, and 5 Teslas help, but David Dobrik registered 4,000 voters without any incentive. He just did one Instagram story and it registered 4,000 voters. So, and Billie Eilish did 2,500 through that, which was really strong. So the short answer is age matters and the demos all matter, but there is this sort of magic weirdness that we can't even figure out. But the thing we know is that YouTube content creators, it wasn't just David Dobrik, it was a guy named Jack Douglas, a guy named Vsauce. They were putting up our biggest numbers this year.
I mean,
That's a really good point as far as like going to where fans are. You know, like we have a gamers vote stage this year. Like we definitely want to expand into that. The opening message on that, I mean, it is my client, but it's from Olympic gold medalist Anthony Irvin. When we first started talking to Living Color, you know, like so many bands, they don't live in the same house, right? So I knew Vernon was really close with W. Kamau Bell. So they're doing a conversation with W. Kamau Bell and Living Color. And obviously comedy is kind of a no-brainer, but I was talking to an NBA team before the pandemic about doing an I Voted show at an NBA game and then just spreading it that way. So, you know, I'm a music person at my core. That's always who we're going to be, but it also feels like a no-brainer to expand, like Andy said, to where voters are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, I'm from being now as a professor at a university, and even though I'm teaching Zoom, the enthusiasm of the students, you know, is feeling contagious and feeling real. You know, it's the discussions, each class now, before class, we have these discussions, and they're talking about going to the polling places and working because they're young and healthy. And I know we have a lot of students have signed up to work at the polling places. Getting them involved, it was just like, you know, they gravitated, I voted, and it feels real. It doesn't feel like they're saying it. It feels like it's in their heart, and it feels like it's now ingrained in them, and they're going to be engaged long term. It's not just, oh, we've gotten this to this point where I have to this time. It's like we're seeing it's real. It's a real feeling out there.
We've had high school students apply to volunteer, and Kevin's right. I mean, we would work with any of Kevin's students, but they send us the most passionate application emails. But then again, we have these high school students who are like, I'm not 18 yet, but I want to contribute. I want to help. I mean, it's like these emails make us cry. It's so inspiring.
I mean, I remember the powerless feeling that you can feel sometimes when you're, you know, 16 or 17 and you can't vote yet, but you're, you know, you're in high school civics and you're so engaged with the news and stuff. I mean, I was kind of a nerd, but still, you know, it looks like we've gotten a question here. And a reminder to anybody watching, please do feel free to submit questions. So we have a audience member asks, I think you all have done a great job on registering voters, but I feel like I do not see a lot of emphasis on education and why you need to vote. Maybe I'm wrong and just don't see it. Do you feel the music business and sports world are educating people on how important the vote is, the history of how votes have changed things locally and nationally, and will that be something to work on more after the election?
You know, in I Voted world, I mean, there's so many amazing voter orgs that, you know, show you what's on the ballot so you can plan ahead for that, you know, deal with all of the awful voter suppression and voter ID and, you know, we'll drive you to the polls, you know, if you're unable to get there. So we want to continue to partner with those orgs. So, you know, we have all of that information. But sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
I think they were asking kind of in terms of like educating.
I know what I was going to say. I felt this way in 2018. You know, we had a total venue promoter approach, and the word promote is in promoter. So we're not telling you who to vote for. Like we're not telling you who to vote for, but we just want to get people like thinking about voting, you know, like getting passionate about voting, starting to research it more. So, you know, because we're nonpartisan, bipartisan, it's not something like I can educate on. And we hear from a lot of artists who don't feel like they, you know, need to tell their audience who to vote for, but it's more just like, I love that, you know, radio stations are coming on board, media is coming on board, like all forms of talent are coming on board. The more we can push voting, the more people start to think about it and then hopefully educate themselves.
Yeah, and I think to the question they're asking about educating people about why voting matters, we've had a lot of wonderful content that our players have put together themselves on this topic. So if people want to go check out, or the person asking the question wants to check out Subject to Change, which is the series that our players put together of their own conversations. They did one with our local NAACP president that really spent the entire time discussing exactly that. How does who you vote for in national, state, and local elections affect things like mass incarceration and things that are affecting your community? So I do think that we're spending a lot of time on that, but I appreciate the question because it is a place to keep people's focus. because registering to vote, as we all know, is only one step, right? Then you need to actually vote. And in between those two things, you need to educate yourself about what's on the ballot. It breaks my heart when I hear people say like, oh, I'm going to vote for president, but I didn't like research everything else on my ballot. Well, in a state like California, you've got like 10 different state propositions that are going to affect things in your life, that are going to affect things in your family's life. You have the person who's running for local judge, for city council, for county supervisor. And these are all important. And so I think it's great for all of us to share resources like Ballotpedia and other nonpartisan sources where people can go look up information. And we've actually had our own employee resource groups within our organization put on education sessions for all employees where they presented like the pro and con of all of these propositions. So I think there's a lot of ways to engage, but it's a good question.
Well, and that's a really good point about down ballot and local races. Our most recent election in my neighborhood in Brooklyn was decided by 1,100 votes, which is smaller than the capacity of Brooklyn Steel down the street. So again, it's like voting is how you make tangible change. And with those down ballot races, I mean, you can have serious impact. So hopefully that inspires people to educate and research everyone on the ballot.
You can
And
never
on
have,
the voter education, I'm sorry, Vernon.
I was going to say, you can never have enough debunking of the claim of voter fraud. Like that is a claim that's 100% false. We're having a problem getting people to vote in the first place. And I think that should be constantly fought against, and it needs to be fought against in a bipartisan way. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
That's totally true. And what's scary is that all the talk about mail-in ballots, it got so politicized that you have Democrats voting by mail in large numbers, Republicans voting by mail in very small numbers. And while voter fraud is basically a myth, what's not a myth at all is ballot rejection. And it's literally in the millions. In New York City, it was over 20% of ballots were rejected. So now that's a nonpartisan thing, but it becomes very partisan in its impact when a lot more voters from one party are voting by mail than the other. It also historically has disproportionately affected Black and Latino voters and young voters. So it's a really, and there's a great author, Greg Palast, who kind of leads the charge on this, on really the dangers of voting by mail. And it's not fraud, it's the opposite. It's your vote not being counted. But what I wanted to say, and I threw something in the chat, is in terms of voter education, I think there are two kind of strains to it. There's information, and then there's kind of persuasion. There's the what and the why. And in terms of information, it's just critically important. So something like right now, a big question people have is, all right, I have my mail-in ballot, but now I don't want to use it because I'm hearing all these issues. How can I vote in person? So we've been putting a lot of that information out. And this year we're seeing more of a need for that information than ever. But when it comes to the why, when it comes to the kind of the persuasion, it's really hard. There is no playbook that statistically is proven to work. It can be really hard to get a non-voter to vote. But there was a great study by the Knight Foundation called the 100 Million Project that's really easy to find on Google, that's about non-voters and why they say they don't vote. And I really encourage people, it's a one-page synopsis at the beginning, and you can learn so much about America by reading this one page. If you Google 100 Million Voters Knight Foundation. And one of the things we did is we created a talking point sheet for friends talking to friends, because friends have more impact than any celebrity, than any public messaging. So we created a kind of tip sheet for how to talk to friends about voting. We've already had 30,000 people view this online. And it's, I threw it in the chat if anybody wants to check it out, but that is hard. I wish there was a formula. I wish somebody could put out a study and say, this is the way to convince people who don't vote to vote. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist.
I think that's what we're all trying to do, though, is like make it cool, make it interesting, make it accessible. I'm going to botch this stat, but you'll get it. 35% of young people vote, but 65% of young people go to concerts. So if we can bridge that gap and make it fun and exciting and celebrate this sacred right, hopefully that's a step in the right direction.
And I think this is also why the outreach to youth is so important, and the outreach that all of you are doing to people under 18, because if through what you were talking about earlier, high school, right? If you feel like voting matters to you when you're 16 and you register and you vote in that first election, you're probably going to be a voter for the rest of your life. And it's so important, not because of who young people will vote for, but because 40 years from now, the people who are now 18 are going to be 58. And if we don't have a society that is engaged and that is voting, we won't have a democracy anymore. Like, I think that, to me, like, this is a real national security issue. Like, this is a serious issue that if we don't bring people into what it means to be American and to participate in democracy, then we won't have voters 40 and 50 years from now.
I think we have a moment in time right now, depending a lot which way it goes next week, to work through a lot of these things, because this administration, as in business, they exploited every loophole. That's why he paid $750 in taxes. But he's exploited every weird loophole in the government and the way our system runs. We need to start rebuilding this. You know what? Why don't we have Saturday voting? Why don't we move it to a day like that? Why don't we have more consistency? Like, voting starts on this day. This is how you do it across. We are the United States. We're not 50 separate states. I know they try to split us over coronavirus and say, deal with it yourselves. But there is a moment in time where I think people are starting to look at it and go, you know what? 94% of us can find some common ground. Really can. We might not agree on everything. I know my bus drivers, they were from Alabama. There were certain things I would never agree on them. But you know what? If we sit there and talk, we can find some common ground. The 3%, I was worried when Trump got in office, I wasn't worried about him. I was worried about the 3% on the farthest sides that would control the dialogue. And that's what's happened right now. The people in between are pulled in so many different directions, but at least they're all talking now. And maybe that 94% can start sitting in rooms together and agree. We're not going to agree maybe on certain things, but you know what? We are democracy. We have a moment to pull it back together. We need to bring this country back together, because we have been sent in, it's been like shotgun blast. Everyone's polarized, and we don't want to be that way. Most people can figure out a way to work together.
That's really, oh, Andy, I'm having some trouble hearing.
Oh, sorry. I just said amen.
Yes, definitely. Amen. And I wanted to share, I'm not sure if you said the links, but headcount.org/talkaboutvoting and knightfoundation.org/reports. We can leave that in the comments. That's a little bit longer URL, but definitely go check that stuff out. You know, it's interesting, Hannah, that you mentioned the ballot propositions. I used to live in California. Now I'm in New York, and you know, I miss being able to vote on so many issues. I do not miss having to do the homework about them. But you know, I wanted to know if you guys, you know, for those audience members who may, you know, still have made it this far in the panel and like aren't sure about voting yet, which, you know, go vote. But can you kind of, what would your message be in terms of this voter is sitting in California or, you know, a deep red state and feels like, oh, my vote isn't going to count. You know, these states, it's a foregone conclusion what's going to happen. I don't live in Pennsylvania, where I might be the difference maker in the presidential election. What would be the, you know, what would be your pitch to say go out and vote regardless?
It's how you make tangible change. And maybe, you know, if you're not in a focused state or whatever, judges make a difference. You know, that's where these issues start and they bubble up to the Supreme Court. You know, if you've been paying attention at all this year, Congress has a huge say, right? You know, I'm almost more interested in what's going on in some of the Senate and House races as I am with the presidential race. So look, I love social media. I love protesting. All of these things are very, very important, but voting is how you make tangible change. And I've dedicated my life to this for the past few years.
Hannah, can I ask you a question? You're in California also, right?
I am.
And I voted early, and I'm so confused on what the way that the advertising's changed on all the propositions. Our family sat and we went through them all. We voted, and now I'm so confused because the commercials have gotten ridiculous in California on the propositions. That none of it's related to actually what the proposition is. It's so confusing for people right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think, gosh, you're taking me all the way back to like poli-sci class long ago, studying whether or not California should have state propositions on the ballot. But yeah, I will tell you, there is one proposition that the 49ers have actually come out and endorsed, which is affirmative action, Proposition 16. We permitted affirmative action in this state for many, many years until Prop Up 209 about 20 years ago. when people voted to eliminate it. Most states allow affirmative action because affirmative action is an anti-racist policy. And because we don't allow that anymore, we've seen reduced Black and Latino businesses getting government contracts, students at UCs, et cetera. And so that's one proposition that we chose to actively support. But yeah, it is really important that people educate themselves, because there are a lot of advertisements on television in both directions on a number of controversial propositions. So it is important. And again, I do recommend things like Ballotpedia that just have a lot of information. And to the point that you guys made earlier about friends, I think it's a great opportunity for us to encourage people. Talk to your friends, have, what they call #voting squad, like have those discussions, because that's a lot of the way that you hash things out. You say, oh, what do you think about that? Well, why do you think that? Well, here's a counterpoint. What do you say to that? So I think, it's an opportunity to have a great conversation with people that you know.
So we're nearing the end of our hour. Again, it's been such a pleasure to have everybody here talking about voting, and obviously a very exciting time, I think, to put it mildly. I wanted, obviously right now everybody is, or many people are very, very engaged. There's tremendous energy, in no small part thanks to efforts of people like yourselves. How do in your various roles and organizations and platforms, how do you keep that going? Whether it's off election years in 2021 or 2023 or midterms in 2022, where, voting has historically been less than presidential elections. How do you harness this sort of energy that you've activated this in 2020 and keep it going into the future? So that's going to be so important.
Yeah, I mean, on iVoted's end, like I said, just, continuing to grow, continuing to expand into fields beyond music. It's not like the most exciting thing, but I've been dying to launch an iVoted podcast, which I'll get around to in 2021. And I'm kind of excited to have the time and space to talk to artists, to talk to key people, instead of this mad rush. That's one of the things I talked about in my op-ed in this week's issue of Pollstar is Headcount does such a phenomenal job, reminding people voter registration deadline in this state, but it's it doesn't need to be such a mad rush. When you're putting your plans together for the year, make sure you identify election day, in primary season and local elections, give your employees the day off and the option of the day off, if they're voting early, if they're voting absentee. So start to plan ahead so it isn't just this mad rush leading up to a national election.
Yeah, and I think an important message always is that voting is the first step, but it's the lowest rung on the ladder of engagement, and the next step is being informed and vocal and an active citizen, and getting young people and music fans to take those steps. It's why we run something called Participation Row at Dead & Company and Lock-In and a few others, where we bring out a lot of different organizations and different causes and try to get fans to engage around issues. And that's something that we'll continue to build. We also have a big multi-year partnership with Global Citizen that's just starting to begin. And our hope certainly is that that kind of brings us to new places, but it all is about being citizens. Voting is a once a year thing, but you're a citizen every day. And that's the message we ultimately want to get out there and what we believe in.
We're gonna have to.
And I would just add that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Vernon.
No, please.
Okay, you're going to say something brilliant after me, so I'm glad you're going to close this out. But I was just going to say, when you think about, where do we take it from here? I think to this sort of ladder of engagement, one of the places is actually encouraging people to run for office, getting to that level of engagement. And I know that I see it, with athletes, they're always going to have a second career because it's not something that you get to do forever like rock stars. So there's been many people who've become public servants afterwards, whether it's serving as judges, whether it's serving in Congress. And I think we can engage our fans in the same way. We've supported Emerge, which gets women to run for office. So I think that's one other place to take this work in the future. I'm sorry, go ahead, Vernon.
Whatever happens with this election, we're going to have to find a way to live together. That's part of the work. Part of it is whatever, issue you're engaged in, of course you're gonna have to stay engaged. But we've made everything so bitter and so divisive. We're gonna have to find a way. I mean, people on the hard margins are not gonna, but we have to find a way to see what's human in each other. We're gonna have to do that, and that may sound woo-woo, but we have to do it, or else what's the point of the United States of America? What's the point if we don't do that?
You know, I just want to add something Andy taught me a few years ago that you may or may not remember, which is like, no matter your beliefs, when things are good, if you're feeling good about who's in office, that's actually when you have to work harder. Right now, y'all are coming to us. Like, everybody wants to help, everyone wants to roll up their sleeves, but it's when you feel good about things, that's actually when you have to work even harder.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end it on. Just I have to do my duty and say, if you haven't voted, go vote. If you have family, friends, go vote, talk to them, tell them to vote, get engaged. If you have a candidate or issue that you're really passionate about, sign up to do some phone calls or text bank, whatever, get involved in obviously, going forward after this election, in addition to, organizations like I Voted and Headcount to get out the vote. There's also, so many issue-based organizations, whether you care about, climate or healthcare or, gun violence, any of these various issues. There's so many ways to get involved, and it's been so cool seeing so many people in the industry that we cover at Pollstar and VenuesNow every day getting involved and using this platform for something bigger than the concert or the game. So thank you all for joining us for this panel. And yeah, again, to anybody watching, vote. So yes, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see how things shake out going forward.
Vote and RSVP at ivotedfestival.com and come celebrate with us on election night.
All right, it's been a real pleasure, you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to see y'all.